I started the hike early in the morning because I thought the cool air would help me move faster. I had picked a long loop trail that cut through an old forest and climbed over a ridge before circling back toward the parking area. The map showed around 14 miles, which felt doable since I had done similar hikes before. I packed water, snacks, a small first aid kit, and a cheap headlamp that I had barely used. I didn't plan to be out late, but I carried it just in case something slowed me down. The first few hours were calm. The forest felt empty in a peaceful way. I walked through long stretches of tall trees where the sunlight came down in thin lines. The only sounds I heard were dry leaves shifting under my boots and the quiet hum of bugs waking up for the day. At one point, I saw a deer run off through the trees. Everything felt normal and I kept a good pace. Around mid-morning, I reached a fork in the trail. The sign was old and worn out, but I could still see the arrow pointing toward the ridge. I followed it without much thought. As I climbed higher, the trail got narrower and the trees thinned. The ground changed from soft dirt to loose stones, and I had to place my feet more carefully. I felt the elevation, but it wasn't too hard. The view became nicer with each turn. I could see the forest spreading far in the distance, looking quiet and still. When I reached the ridge top, I sat down on a rock to rest. The wind was stronger up there, and it moved through my shirt in a cold way even though the sun was warm. I ate a small snack and checked my phone. There was no signal, but I expected that. I put the phone back in my pocket and stood up to continue the loop. That was when I noticed something strange. The trail looked different on this side. It felt less used, like fewer people walked here. Some parts had grass growing in the middle, but the map had clearly shown the loop trail running across the ridge and back down the other side, so I assumed it was just not as popular. I stepped forward and continued following it. After about a mile, I reached an area where several fallen trees blocked the way. They looked old, covered with moss and cracked bark. I climbed over them slowly. The trees were rough, and the wood crumbled under my weight. Once I got past them, the trail became harder to see. Patches of dirt were still there, but they were broken up by weeds, exposed roots, and uneven ground. It didn't look like a proper trail anymore, but I convinced myself that maybe this part just didn't get much upkeep. The real problem started when the path split into two lines barely visible on the forest floor. They curved away from each other, both disappearing into thick trees. The map on my phone was useless without a signal, but I had downloaded it beforehand. When I opened it, I noticed something that made my stomach feel heavy. The loop wasn't supposed to split here. The trail was shown as one clean line. I stood there for a moment and tried to match the shapes of the land around me with the map. None of it looked right. Everything felt off, like I had walked into an area the map didn't bother to show. I chose the right path because it looked a little more walked on. It wasn't a confident choice, just a guess, but I had to pick something. I walked for what felt like an hour, but the trees looked the same in every direction. The path kept fading and reappearing. Sometimes it looked clear, sometimes it looked like nothing more than flattened leaves and loose dirt. The sun had moved higher, and I couldn't tell how far I had gone from the ridge. I kept thinking the trail would reconnect with the loop, but every step made me feel more lost. At one point, I stopped and tried to listen for anything. Water, wind, cars, even planes. But the forest around me was completely silent. The kind of silence that feels thick, like it presses against your ears. It made me realize how far I probably was from the main trail. I decided to turn around and follow my steps back. But when I looked behind me, the path I had just walked didn't look like a path anymore. The forest floor was covered with the same leaves, sticks, and patches of dirt as everything else. I tried walking back anyway, guessing the direction, but after a few minutes, I felt like I was only getting deeper into the trees. The sun started to drop behind the canopy, and the light changed quickly. That was when the real fear hit me. It wasn't a sudden panic, but a slow, cold feeling spreading through my chest. I realized that if I didn't find the main trail soon, I would be caught in this forest at night with only a cheap headlamp and not enough layers for the cold. I forced myself to keep moving. I tried to walk in straight lines, aiming for downhill sections because usually trails are cut along natural slopes. I stepped over large roots, slid on loose dirt, and pushed branches aside. At times, I saw shapes on the ground that looked like footsteps, but they always ended in thick brush or dead ends. As the light got dimmer, I felt more tense. Every sound in the forest suddenly mattered. The rustle of something small running through dry leaves, the creak of a tree trunk bending in the wind, branches snapping somewhere far behind me. I knew they were all normal forest sounds, but they made my heart race. I kept checking over my shoulder, feeling like something was following me, even though I knew it was just my fear building up. When the sun finally dropped and the forest got dark, I turned on my headlamp. Its light was weak and narrow, but it was all I had. The beam shook every time my hands trembled. I slowed down, watching each step carefully because the ground was uneven. I reached a spot where the trees thinned a little, and I noticed a faint line in the dirt that looked like an actual trail. It was cleaner, flatter, and slightly wider than anything I had seen in hours. I followed it, hoping it was part of the loop. As I walked, the trail became clearer. I started to feel a small sense of relief, the first one in a long time. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop again. On the ground ahead of me, near a shallow ditch, there were broken pieces of a plastic water bottle. They were faded and dirty, like they had been there for a long time. Next to them was a torn piece of fabric tangled in a low branch. It looked like part of a backpack strap or clothing. Everything about the area felt wrong. Felt like someone else had been lost here before me. The trail kept going, but it didn't look like a maintained one anymore. It looked like a path people had made while trying to find their way out. A path of mistakes, a path of fear. I stood there, frozen for a few seconds, trying to push down the panic rising inside me. I kept walking because stopping wouldn't help. The trail led me downhill, twisting between trees. At one point, I slipped and slid several feet on loose dirt, scraping my hands. I felt small rocks dig into my palms, but I didn't stop to clean them. I just kept moving. The forest eventually opened a little, and I saw something that finally gave me hope. The faint glow of a light through the trees. Not a bright one, but steady enough to look man-made. I changed direction toward it, pushing through bushes until I reached a rough gravel road. I stepped onto it, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The light came from a small maintenance shed near a trail access gate. There were no people around, but the road meant I was close to the main park entrance. I followed the road until I reached the parking area. My car was the only one left. I opened the door, sat inside, and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. The ending was simple but clear. I survived because I didn't stop moving, even when everything inside me wanted to freeze. The forest didn't do anything strange. It didn't hide secrets or supernatural things. It was just nature, uncaring and massive, and I was just a person who made a wrong turn and kept walking deeper into it. The fear came from how easy it was to get lost and how fast everything can go wrong when the trail disappears and the daylight runs out. After that day, I understood how fragile the feeling of safety can be in the wilderness. I learned to respect it more, plan better, and never assume a trail will always stay open and clear. I drove away with scratched hands, sore legs, and a mind full of thoughts I couldn't shake off. But I made it out, and that was the only thing that mattered in the end. I had been planning the hike for months, and I picked a random trail that I found online because it looked quiet and not too busy. I wanted a long, peaceful walk away from everything. The trail was about 4 hours away from the city, tucked deep between tall hills and thick woods. I left early in the morning so I could start before the heat came in. The drive itself felt normal, and I honestly didn't think anything strange would happen. I had done many hikes alone before, and nothing bad ever happened on those trips, so I didn't think twice about this one. When I arrived, the parking area was almost empty. There were only 2 other cars there, both covered in dust like they had been sitting for days. The trail started with an old wooden sign that had almost no paint left on it. The path went into a dark line of tall trees, and I remember thinking it looked colder than it should, like the sun couldn't touch it. I tightened my bag straps and started walking. The first hour felt peaceful. The trail was narrow and covered in fallen leaves. I could hear nothing but the crunch of my footsteps and a distant stream. The air smelled clean, and everything around me felt still. The deeper I went, the more the silence grew. Even the wind seemed to disappear. I kept checking my map, and the path looked straightforward, so I didn't really worry when the trees got thicker and the light dimmed. The woods looked old, and it felt like nobody had been there for a long time. After about 2 hours, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a small feeling that I couldn't shake off. It started when I noticed shoe prints on the ground that weren't mine. They were fresh. The dirt looked disturbed only minutes before I stepped there. They were deeper than my own footsteps, like the person had been heavier or carrying something. I slowed down a little. I told myself the trail might have more people on it than I expected, even though I hadn't seen anyone. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I couldn't even hear birds. That's when I first felt something uncomfortable inside me, like I wasn't as alone as I thought. I kept walking, trying to ignore the feeling, but not long after that I noticed something else. A small piece of torn fabric was stuck on a branch. It looked like part of a sleeve or maybe a pocket. The edges were ripped, not cut. It wasn't old either, the color was still bright. Someone must have passed through recently and tore it off by accident. I didn't like how low it was on the branch, almost at knee level, like someone had been pushed or had fallen. I tried to brush off the thought and continued on. The trail became rougher and steeper. I could feel sweat on my back and dirt sticking to my boots. I saw another set of footprints again after a while, but this time they were messy, like whoever made them had been stumbling. They slipped sideways a few times, leaving long marks in the mud. That made me slow down even more. I didn't want to run into someone injured in the middle of nowhere, and honestly, I didn't want to run into anyone acting strange. I just wanted to be alone on my hike. At one point, the trail curved sharply around a large boulder. When I walked around it, I froze for a moment. There were more footprints, but these ones looked like the person had been running. The ground was torn up in long lines, and small rocks were scattered everywhere. Something about it looked wrong. I couldn't tell if the person had been running away from something or towards something, but either way it sent a heavy feeling into my stomach. I started turning my head more often, checking behind me every few minutes, and listening to every small sound. But the woods stayed dead silent. I kept moving, but I couldn't relax anymore. My breathing grew shallow, and I felt a strange pressure on my chest. The deeper I walked, the more it felt like the woods were closing in on me. The trail became narrower, and I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while. I knew I hadn't gone off the path, but something felt off. It felt like the trees around me were taller and closer together than they were before, and the air felt colder, even though the sun was still high. About 4 hours into the hike, I came across something that made my whole body tense. On the ground, right in the middle of the trail, there was a backpack. It wasn't old. It looked like somebody had dropped it only a short time before. It was unzipped, and everything inside it was scattered around the dirt. Snacks, a water bottle, a rolled-up map, a flashlight with the battery cover missing. It looked like someone had emptied it in a hurry and left everything behind. I didn't touch anything. I didn't want my fingerprints on someone else's belongings in case something bad had happened. My hands started shaking a little, and I realized I wasn't hiking anymore. I was searching for a way to feel safe again. I took a few steps forward and noticed something else. The footprints around the backpack were deep, and the dirt was torn up like the person had been dragged or forced to move. There were marks going off the trail into the thick trees. The soil looked like it had been scraped by the edge of a boot. I didn't know if the person had been hurt or if there was something else happening, but everything inside me screamed that I needed to leave. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. I didn't run at first because I didn't want to make noise. I just walked fast, focusing on the trail and trying not to think about the backpack or the deep footprints. After a few minutes, I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my heartbeat jump. It sounded like a branch snapping under someone's weight. I didn't want to turn around. I just kept walking, but the sound came again. A soft crack, then leaves shifting. I finally looked back and saw nothing, but the silence afterward hurt my ears. I could feel my legs starting to shake on their own, even though I was trying to stay calm. The trail seemed longer on the way back. Every section looked different, like the woods didn't want me to leave. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The fresh footprints, the torn fabric, the backpack, the drag marks. I didn't know what had happened out there, but I knew I didn't want to be the next person leaving their belongings on the trail. I kept moving as fast as I could. Sometimes I would hear small sounds behind me, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. The trees felt too close. The shadows felt too deep. At one point, I felt like something was watching me from between the branches. I didn't see anything, but the feeling was heavy, like a weight pressing on my back. I pushed my legs to move faster. When I finally reached the large boulder from earlier, I felt a small wave of relief because I knew I was getting closer to the start of the trail. The footprints that had looked like someone running were still there, and seeing them made me feel even more scared because now I fully understood the panic in the steps. I didn't stop. I didn't drink water. I didn't rest. I just kept going. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the entrance clearing. My car was still there. The other 2 cars were still parked, looking exactly the same as before. But now I looked at them differently. I wondered if one of them belonged to the person who left the backpack. I wondered how long those cars had been sitting there with no one checking on them. I got into my car and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so hard that I could barely put the keys in the ignition. When I drove away, I kept checking my mirrors the whole time. I didn't calm down until I reached the main road again, far away from the woods. The whole drive home, my mind wouldn't stop replaying everything. I kept thinking about how close I came to crossing paths with whoever was out there. I didn't know if the person who left the backpack was hurt, running, or hiding. I didn't know if someone dangerous was still in those woods. All I knew was that something real happened on that trail, something human, something violent, something that didn't need ghosts to be terrifying. The next day, I considered calling someone to report the backpack, but I convinced myself that maybe it wasn't my place. Maybe someone else had already taken care of it. But even now, I regret not saying anything. I still think about it sometimes, especially at night when everything is quiet. I picture the backpack on the dirt, the things scattered around it, the deep footprints leading into the trees. I haven't gone hiking alone since then. Every trail I look at now reminds me of how quickly a peaceful walk can turn into something dangerous. I learned that sometimes the scariest things in the woods aren't animals or strange noises in the dark. Sometimes it's the things that look normal, footprints, torn fabric, an abandoned backpack, and the quiet, heavy feeling that someone else is out there with you, watching you, moving just out of sight. And the worst part is that I left that place without knowing what really happened. I walked away with only fear and questions. But one thing is clear, whatever happened out there was real, and it could have happened to anyone. It could have happened to me if I had arrived an hour earlier or walked a little slower. That thought is what stays with me the most, and it's the reason I don't go back to trails like that anymore. I survived only because I left when I did. That's the clear truth. That trail wasn't empty at all. I just didn't meet the person who made those footprints. Someone who, for some reason, didn't want to be seen. I went hiking that morning without telling anyone where I was going. It wasn't a smart choice, but I didn't think much about it. I had the day off. I felt restless, and I wanted to clear my head. The mountains outside the city always helped me breathe a little easier. I picked a trail that wasn't well known because I liked quiet places. The fewer people I saw, the better. I didn't realize how dangerous that choice would feel later. The trail started wide and dry with a slow climb uphill. The air felt cool, and the sun was soft, not too strong yet. I could smell pine and dirt, and the ground felt firm under my boots. I walked with steady steps, enjoying the silence. There was nothing strange about the first part of my hike. If anything, it felt peaceful. The forest on each side of me looked calm, and the only sounds were from the wind shaking the leaves. After maybe 30 minutes, the path narrowed, and the trees grew closer together. Their branches hung low, and the light started to dim even though the sky above was still bright. I ignored the slight discomfort in my stomach and kept going. Narrow paths were normal. I had hiked worse before, but the strange part was how quiet things got. No birds, no insects, nothing moving in the bushes. Just my footsteps and my breathing. Felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. As I walked deeper, I reached an old wooden fence post on the side of the trail. It had a small strip of faded red paint on it. My map showed that this marked the point where the trail split into two routes. The right path was longer but better maintained. The left one was shorter but barely used. I don't know why I chose the left one. Maybe I wanted to finish early. Maybe I thought I'd enjoy the quiet. I stepped onto the left trail without thinking too hard. The moment my boot touched the dirt, I felt the ground soften under me. The path looked like it hadn't been walked on in a long time. Fallen branches lay everywhere. Some looked fresh, like they had broken recently. The trees hung even lower now, almost brushing my shoulders. The air smelled different too, damp and heavy. I kept moving slowly, watching the ground. Then I noticed something strange. Footprints, faint but clear enough to see. They looked like someone with hiking boots had walked through the soft dirt maybe a day or two earlier. The steps were uneven, spaced strangely, as if the person had a limp or was dragging one foot. I felt a small wave of unease wash through me, but I tried not to panic. People walk weird sometimes. Maybe the ground made them slip. But the deeper I followed the footprints, the more wrong everything felt. The steps drifted into the bushes and then came back onto the trail. Some prints were deeper, like the person had stumbled. There were marks beside them that didn't look like footsteps. Long lines scratched into the dirt like something heavy had been pulled across it. The marks went off the path and disappeared into the thicker trees. Seeing those drag marks made my stomach twist. They weren't deep enough to be made by a fallen tree or a branch. They looked like something soft had been pulled along the ground. I tried to think of an innocent explanation, but my brain kept jumping to darker thoughts. I pushed myself to keep going anyway. After 20 more minutes, the forest grew even more silent. My own footsteps sounded too loud, echoing strangely off the trees. Every time I stepped on a leaf, the crackle felt sharp, like it didn't belong in the quiet. My nerves were tightening, but I tried to stay calm. The trail curved slightly to the left, and when I turned with it, I saw something lying on the ground ahead. A backpack. It was small, dark gray, and coated in dust. One of the straps was torn completely off, and the zipper was half open. It looked like it had been thrown or dropped hard. I crouched down and inspected it without touching too much. Inside, I could see a crushed water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, and a small map ripped at the edges. No identification, no phone, nothing else. I felt a cold sensation crawl across my shoulders. My first thought was that someone was in trouble. But my second thought, the stronger one, was that whoever owned this backpack might still be somewhere nearby. I didn't want to meet them. I stood up and continued forward, but my steps became faster now. My breathing got heavier, not from physical strain but from the tension growing inside me. The trail got narrower again until it was barely wider than my own body. Branches scraped against my backpack as I moved. That's when I heard something behind me, a soft crunch. Then another. Footsteps. Slow, careful, measured footsteps. I froze instantly. The sound stopped too. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see anything. I forced myself to keep moving even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But the ground was uneven, and the trail sloped downward sharply. If I ran and slipped, I would probably break something. So I walked faster, almost speed walking. The footsteps started again, matching mine. Not too close, but close enough that I could tell it was a person. Heavy enough to be human, too slow to be an animal, too controlled to be random. My heart started pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. Sweat formed on my neck even though the air felt cold. I didn't know what to do except keep moving forward. The trail eventually led to a small clearing where the trees opened up suddenly. I stepped into it and finally spun around quickly, expecting to see someone. But the trail behind me was empty. Nothing moved. Only the wind brushed the tops of the trees. My chest tightened even more. I wasn't imagining the footsteps. They were real. For a moment, I stood still, trying to hear anything else. The forest stayed silent. Then I noticed something on the edge of the clearing. Another footprint. Fresh, crisp edges. Pointed toward the trees, not toward the trail. It looked like someone had stepped out of the forest and watched the clearing. I backed away slowly and returned to the trail. I didn't want to stay in any open area longer than necessary. My instincts told me to keep moving, keep heading toward the end of the loop, where the trail eventually reconnected to the main path. As long as I kept going forward, I would eventually reach safety. But the forest didn't make it easy. The trail became steeper and darker. The ground turned slippery in some parts. I felt like someone was watching me from the trees, but every time I looked back, I saw nothing. The silence felt thick, almost unnatural. My shoulders stayed tense the entire time. After what felt like an hour, I saw the wooden fence post again, the one with the faded red paint. I didn't care about the longer path anymore. I instantly turned onto the right trail, the more maintained one. I moved so fast that my legs started to ache. The trees finally thinned out. The path widened. Sunlight reached the ground again. The air smelled fresher, lighter. But even then, I didn't stop. I kept walking until I finally saw the trailhead through the trees. My car sat alone in the parking area. The sight of it filled me with a huge wave of relief. I felt my body loosen up for the first time in hours. When I reached my car, I didn't look back at the trail. I unlocked the door, climbed inside, and locked it immediately. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. My heartbeat still felt too fast. I kept staring straight out the windshield, scared that if I looked into the trees, I might see someone standing there. I drove away as fast as I safely could, and I didn't stop until I got back to my neighborhood. When I parked in front of my house, I sat there for a while, breathing slowly, trying to calm myself. I kept thinking about the backpack, the footprints, the drag marks, the footsteps behind me, the clearing, the fresh footprint pointing toward the trees. Someone had been out there, someone who didn't want to be seen, someone who followed me long enough to study my pace, my steps, the sound of my movement. And the worst part was that I never found out who it was. There were no news reports later, no missing hikers, no alerts, nothing. It made the whole experience feel even more disturbing because it meant that whoever was out there wasn't missing. They were still somewhere in those woods, living or hiding in a place most people never walk into. I still think about that day. Sometimes at night, when I lie in bed, I remember the slow steps behind me, the heavy silence, the feeling of eyes watching from the trees. I wasn't attacked, I wasn't grabbed, nothing physical happened. But sometimes the scariest things are the ones that never fully reveal themselves. I never went back to that mountain again, and I never hike alone anymore, because I'm sure someone followed me that day, and they saw me long before I ever knew they were there. I decided to go on that hike because I felt stuck in my routine. I wanted a long trail, something far away from noise and people. I picked a route deep in the mountains, about 3 hours from home. The trail wasn't famous, and that was exactly why I chose it. I liked the idea of walking alone, being surrounded by nature, and having hours of quiet with nothing but my own footsteps and the sound of the wind. I didn't realize how quickly the peace of the morning would turn into hours of fear that would follow me long after the hike was over. I started early, just after sunrise. The air was cold enough that my breath came out in small clouds, and the ground still held the dampness from the night. There were no cars in the parking area except mine, which made me feel proud at first, like I was doing something bold and adventurous. The forest looked peaceful. The trees were tall, their branches hanging low from the weight of moisture. Everything smelled clean, fresh. I locked my car and stepped onto the trail, feeling relaxed and steady. For the first hour, nothing felt strange. It was the kind of hike I always liked. Soft dirt under my boots, leaves rustling with tiny movements, small stones crunching now and then. The trail climbed slowly at the start, giving me time to warm up. I heard a creek running parallel to the path, hidden somewhere behind the trees. The world felt slow and quiet. Nothing about it suggested danger or anything to be worried about. But things changed when I reached a bend in the trail where the trees opened slightly. That's where I saw the first sign that something wasn't normal. Near a fallen log on the right side of the trail, I spotted a torn piece of black fabric. It looked like it came from a jacket or maybe a backpack. I don't usually see things like that in places this isolated. It wasn't old either. The edges looked freshly ripped, and the dirt around it wasn't settled. I didn't touch it, I just stared at it for a moment. It felt out of place. I tried telling myself someone probably tore their jacket on the log, but the thought didn't sit right with me. Still, I kept walking. Not long after that, I noticed deep impressions in the dirt ahead of me. At first, I thought they were boot prints, but when I looked closely, I saw they were too wide, too heavy. Someone heavier than me must have walked through earlier in the morning. But the weird thing was how spaced out the prints were. They didn't follow a straight line. Some were off the trail, some slightly behind rocks or hidden beside bushes. It looked like the person didn't just hike the trail. They wandered around it, stepping in and out of the woods with no clear direction. Something about it made me uneasy. Most people walk in a straight, normal line. These prints clearly didn't. The forest started to feel heavier as I went deeper. The trees grew closer together and the trail narrowed. The air felt still, almost thick, like the forest was holding its breath. I walked slower, listening more than enjoying. Every small sound made me look around. A falling pine cone, a distant bird, the soft shift of branches. Everything sounded sharper than usual. Then I found something else that made me more nervous. It was a plastic water bottle crushed flat, sitting right in the middle of the trail. The label wasn't faded, which meant it wasn't old. Someone had dropped it recently. I picked it up, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to check if it was dirty. It wasn't. It looked fresh, like it had been tossed there minutes before I arrived. When I put it down, I realized something that made my hands feel colder. All the signs I was seeing, the ripped fabric, the scattered footprints, the crushed bottle, they all pointed to one thing. Someone was out here. Someone alone. Someone careless or in a rush. And I had not seen a single person. That was when the forest started feeling like it was closing in on me. The quiet became uncomfortable. The sky above the trees started to look dim, even though it wasn't afternoon yet. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, like it was pressing onto my back. Around noon, I reached the steepest part of the trail. That's where the sounds started. Not loud ones, just small, sharp snaps from somewhere off the trail. Twigs cracking, leaves being stepped on. The kind of sounds that make you stop walking without thinking. Each time I paused, the forest went silent again. Completely silent. Too silent. No birds, no wind, just my heartbeat pounding harder than it should. I kept telling myself it could be animals, but the sounds were too slow, too spaced out, like footsteps trying to stay quiet. And they always came from behind me or to the side, never in front. I didn't want to panic, so I kept moving. But every few minutes, I looked back. I didn't see anyone. The trail behind me stayed empty. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was using the trees for cover, stepping when I stepped, stopping when I stopped. That thought alone made my skin crawl. Then I saw something that made me freeze completely. On the left side of the trail, half hidden under a bush, I saw a glove, a dark one. I picked it up with the tip of 2 fingers. It was damp, not from rain but from sweat. Whoever dropped it had been wearing it recently. I didn't like that at all. It confirmed something I had been trying not to believe. Someone was out here, close, and not walking normally. They were moving around in a strange way, leaving things behind, and possibly circling the same areas. By then, my nerves were getting tight. I wasn't enjoying the hike anymore. All I wanted was to turn around and get back to my car. I debated it for a full minute, just standing there, breathing slowly, trying to think. Eventually, I made up my mind. I turned around and started hiking back at a fast pace. I didn't want to look paranoid, but I knew I needed to leave. The whole walk back felt worse than the walk up. Every step made me feel like I was being watched from somewhere between the trees. I kept checking behind me. The trail looked empty every time, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. Halfway down, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A boot print that wasn't there earlier. I knew it wasn't, because I had walked the exact same path just an hour or two before. This print was clearer, deeper, pointed toward the direction I was heading. Someone had stepped there after I passed earlier. Someone had been behind me at some point and I didn't notice. That realization made cold sweat run down my back. I picked up my pace, almost jogging at times. The forest around me felt darker, even though the light hadn't changed. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like someone standing there. When I reached the part of the trail where the trees thinned out, I finally saw the parking area through the gaps. Relief hit me so hard that my knees felt weak. I forced myself to keep going, not slowing down until I reached the gravel at the bottom. But the worst moment came when I reached my car. There were fresh footprints in the gravel, heavy ones. They led toward my car door, then moved away toward the trail again. They weren't mine. They weren't shaped like anything I had seen earlier. They looked like the same shape as the prints scattered deep in the woods, wide, heavy, uneven, like the person walked with force. I looked around fast. The trees were still. The trail was empty. But the prints proved that whoever had been out there had come close to my car at some point while I was hiking. Close enough to touch it. I unlocked the door, got inside, and immediately locked it. I sat there breathing hard, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. I looked around one last time, checking the entire parking lot. Nothing moved, but the fear didn't leave. Felt like it was sitting right beside me, heavy on my chest. I drove out fast, watching the trailhead shrink in my mirror. I didn't calm down until I was back on the main road with cars around me. When I got home, I kept thinking about everything I saw. The torn fabric, the strange prints, the hidden glove, the crushed bottle, the sounds in the woods, the new footprint in the dirt, the ones around my car. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that someone had been watching parts of the trail. Someone who never wanted to be seen. Someone who probably knew those woods better than I did. The ending is simple and real. I never reported it, but I made a promise to myself that day. I would never hike alone again, no matter how peaceful a trail looked. Because that day taught me something important. The woods can feel safe until the moment they don't. And the scariest thing out there isn't an animal or something supernatural. It's a person you never see, who moves quiet, hides well, and watches from the trees while you walk deeper into a place where no one can help you. I planned that hike months before it happened, and I remember how excited I was during the long drive to the trailhead. I wanted a quiet day away from everything, just me, my backpack, and a long empty trail deep in the mountains. The morning was cool and still, the sky gray and soft, and the forest around the parking area looked calm. I locked my car, tightened the straps on my pack, and started walking. I didn't know then that the whole day would turn into one of the most stressful and frightening experiences of my life. The kind of thing that stays in your head forever and makes your body remember fear even after you think you moved on. The first hour was peaceful. The trail was lined with tall pines, and the ground was soft from old needles. Everything smelled clean and earthy. There was no wind, just the faint sound of a distant creek. I moved at a steady pace, enjoying the quiet, enjoying the space. I didn't see anyone else, which felt nice at the time. I liked the idea of having the entire mountain to myself. But then, about an hour and a half in, I noticed something I didn't like. It was just a small thing, but it made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't understand then. It was a footprint. A single, deep footprint pressed into a patch of soft dirt on the edge of the trail. It wasn't a boot print. It looked like a regular sneaker, but bigger than mine and very fresh. The dirt around it was still dark and damp, like someone had stepped there not long before I arrived. That alone wasn't strange, people hike all the time. But what bothered me was that the footprint was facing the opposite direction I was walking. Someone had been going back toward the trailhead, not deeper into the woods. Still, I didn't overthink it. I kept walking. About 10 minutes later, I saw another footprint. This one was slightly off the trail, as if the person had stepped into the brush for a moment before returning to the path. Then I spotted another one about 20 steps ahead, but this one was almost hidden behind a rock. After that, more of them showed up, spread out in a strange pattern. None of them made a normal walking line. They were scattered, facing different angles, as if the person had kept stepping off the trail, wandering around, then stepping back. It didn't look like a normal hiker moving with purpose. It looked like someone pacing around or watching something. The more I saw, the more uncomfortable I felt. But I kept going because I didn't want to turn back for something that might be nothing. I tried telling myself that maybe the person was taking photos or looking for a lost item. But the truth is, I had a weird tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Another hour passed, and the trail began climbing higher. The trees were denser, and the forest floor felt darker. The air had a heavy stillness that made it seem like everything was listening. I stopped to drink water, and as I put the bottle back, I heard a sharp crack in the woods. Not like a small twig snapping, more like someone stepping hard on a dry branch, putting their full weight on it. I froze, every muscle in my body going stiff. The sound came from somewhere to my right, deep enough into the trees that I couldn't see anything. I waited, thinking maybe it was a deer or some animal, but the forest stayed completely silent after that. No rustling, no movement, just silence thick enough to make me feel like I was standing in a vacuum. I didn't like that at all. I kept walking, but much slower than before. I found myself checking behind me every few minutes, convinced I would see someone standing on the trail. The feeling of being watched kept getting stronger. I tried to ignore it. I tried to stay logical, but my nerves were getting tense, and the forest felt heavier with every step. Around noon, I reached a narrow part of the trail where the trees grew so close together that barely any sunlight reached the ground. The shadows were long and tangled. The air felt colder there, almost like stepping into a different place. As I walked through it, I noticed something on the ground to my left, a crushed energy bar wrapper. It was new, shiny, no dirt on it. Someone had dropped it not long ago. I didn't eat that brand, and I always check my trash pockets before leaving home. The second I saw it, that same tight feeling hit my chest even harder. Someone else had come through here very recently. Someone messy. Someone not paying attention to anything except maybe whatever they were doing. I walked faster, even though the trail grew steeper and rougher. I wasn't enjoying the hike anymore. I felt trapped in a long corridor of trees with no one around if something happened. After another 20 minutes, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a broken branch hanging at eye level on the right side of the trail. But the break wasn't from weather or an animal, it was snapped clean at shoulder height, the way it would break if someone was walking and pushed through it roughly. That was when I decided I didn't want to keep going. I didn't care about finishing the trail or reaching the viewpoint. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, and I didn't want to get myself into a worse situation. I turned around and started walking back. For a moment, I felt relieved, thinking I'd soon be back near the parking area. But as soon as I began heading down, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. Some of the footprints I had seen earlier, the ones facing the opposite direction, now made sense. They weren't from someone going back toward the trailhead. They were from someone walking the same direction as me earlier, but turning back toward me or stepping in and out of the trail again and again. A sick, heavy realization grew in my mind. The footprints weren't random. Someone had been pacing around and watching parts of the trail. Someone had been moving in unpredictable ways. And if the energy bar wrapper was fresh, that meant the person wasn't far. As I went downhill, I felt as if the forest got quieter with every minute, which only made my anxiety worse. My footsteps sounded too loud. I felt exposed, like something could step onto the trail behind me at any second. My pack felt heavier, making me feel slower. Every shadow between the trees looked like a place where someone could hide. At one point, I passed the area where I had heard that sharp crack. I didn't want to look into the woods, but I forced myself to at least glance sideways. The trees were packed tight, their trunks dark and still. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched was so strong that the hair on my arms rose. I walked faster, almost jogging. After about 30 more minutes, I reached a long straight section of trail. The visibility was better there, so I felt a small wave of relief. I kept my eyes forward and kept moving. Then something caught my eye behind me. It was quick, just the faintest hint of movement far up the trail. When I looked back again, I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the idea that someone had stepped behind a tree the moment I turned around. The trail was too quiet, the air too thick with tension. My heartbeat started pounding hard, and I stopped caring about pacing myself. I started running. The trail was rough and my legs burned, but I didn't care how tired I got. All I could think about was getting back to my car. I didn't look behind me anymore because I was afraid of what I might see. I just ran and ran, breathing hard, feeling sweat drip down my back. When I finally reached the lower part of the trail, the forest opened up slightly. I could see the parking area in the distance, through gaps between the trees. Felt like seeing safety, like seeing a lifeline. I pushed myself harder. Every sound, every bird call, every rustle made me jump. When my feet hit the gravel near the parking lot, I didn't slow down. I ran straight to my car, threw my backpack into the passenger seat, and locked the doors the moment I got inside. I sat there breathing hard, sweat sticking to my shirt, hands shaking from the tension. I kept looking at the trail entrance, expecting someone to walk out. No one did, but as I sat there trying to calm myself, I noticed something that sent another wave of fear through me. On the passenger side window, near the bottom corner, there was a faint smear. It looked like a thumbprint, a large one. I couldn't tell if it was new or something I never noticed before, but at that moment, seeing it made my stomach drop. It made me wonder if someone had been around the parking area when I arrived earlier, watching people come and go, maybe waiting for someone alone like me. I didn't wait to think more. I turned the engine on and drove out of there as fast as I safely could. Even on the main road, I kept checking my mirrors the entire time, half expecting a car to appear behind me. Nothing did. The rest of the day felt strange. My body stayed tense for hours. Even at home, I kept replaying everything in my head. The footprints, the wrapper, the snap in the woods, the feeling of being watched. I realized the part that scared me the most wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't see. Because whoever else had been out there was close enough to leave fresh signs but never showed themselves. They stayed hidden, moving quietly, stepping in and out of the woods like they knew the area better than I did. The ending is simple and clear. I reported the incident online on a local hiking forum a few days later. A man replied saying he had a similar experience on that same trail 2 months before mine. Scattered footprints, strange noises, the feeling of being watched. He said he cut his hike short too. That was when I made a decision. I haven't gone hiking alone since that day, and I never will again.